Oh my god. That dude's mom is so fat. Hey everybody, Coldar here. Today we are looking at heroic Gara'jal the Spiritbinder and Mogu'shan Vaults. So this fight is really just a gear check. It requires quite a bit of DPS to beat the Berserk timer, and also quite a bit of healing, depending on your setup, just because there can be a lot of spike damage if you can't deal with the adds inside the Spirit Realm properly. So we are using 2 tanks, which is required, and then also 2 healers. We experimented a while with 3 healers. A lot of people use a Disciplined Priest or similar healer that can do damage and heal simultaneously to give you kind of a nice balance. But we just didn't have the DPS to make that strategy happen, so we're using 2 healers just flat out. So as for heroic differences, there aren't that many changes from the normal version, so I won't talk about a lot of the basics. Instead, Fertles go through the fight a couple times and describe the differences on heroic, how we handle that, and then I'll just talk about the overall strategy to maximize our damage output and all that stuff. So the first thing you'll notice is there are several souls visible to me as a non-tank in the Spirit Realm. So there's one in the back that just died and then one to my left. So every time a tank gets teleported into the Spirit Realm, there will be 3 Severer of Soul spawns in heroic instead of just the normal 1. So one of these, by the entrance, is still only visible and attackable by the tank, so the tank needs to prioritize that. However, 2 other Severers are attackable and visible to the rest of the raid when they're in the Spirit Realm. So, just like on normal, if a Severer is not killed in time, it will kill the tank outright. So you need to have your DPS prioritize killing Severer of Souls within the Spirit Realm if they spawn. The timing on this can be tricky, so you may notice at the beginning of this fight, when the first totem spawns, we actually delay sending in our first group by about 10 seconds. And this is, again, talking about maximizing DPS and stuff. But it also delays the timing of when that first group comes out so that we get a little bit of time to help attack the Severers, because that transition can be tricky if you go in right away when that first totem spawns. Other than that, the remaining time, everyone goes in as soon as they can for the totem. So I highly suggest you try that. You'll get a little bit more time to DPS the boss before you start transitioning into totems, and it will help you a little bit with the spawns inside the Spirit Realm at the beginning, since there aren't very many at the start. This way you can attack the Severer a little bit with that first group before the second group comes in and has to quickly finish them off. So, otherwise it's the same, like I said, just kill the Severers before the expiration, and then your tank will survive and port back out. The only other difference on heroic is that when a player leaves the Spirit Realm, they receive the Frail Soul debuff. And this is a 30-second debuff. And when you have it, if you try to step into a Spirit Totem when it dies and enter the Spirit Realm again, you'll just die immediately. So, this is basically just a hard mechanic that prevents the same players from rotating into the Spirit Realm every time the totems come up. You essentially have to use your entire raid, for the most part, to rotate into that Spirit Totem realm whenever you can. So, typically, the way this will work with the timing is that the groups will often just rotate back and forth. 3 players in the first set, 3 players in the second set, and then rotate back to the first set of 3 players on the third one. So you may notice that our Enhancement Shaman, Warlock, and myself were in the first group of players to go in, and then we went into the third one, and now we're going into the 5th one, or maybe this is 7th, I lost track. I guess it's 7th. But essentially, that tends to be the pattern. This is just because the timing of voodoo dolls doesn't quite line up right, so often we're allowed to stay out during the 30-second Frail Soul debuff time, and not get voodoo dolled until we have to go back in. So sometimes you have to transition and change this on the fly, so be ready to have another player step in and substitute. But for the most part, you'll often see rotations happening on their own. As far as priority to players that go inside, you generally want your highest dot DPS classes to be the highest priority players. So they will do the most damage to the spirit ads inside, because when you start to get a large number of them, they can simply dot one up, dot the next one, and so on. And then even after the 30 seconds of being in the spirit realm has ended, they can leave and dot damage can continue to tick on those ads. So overall damage to the inside targets will be slightly higher for dot players. So take advantage of that. The other basic mechanic isn't different than on normal, but it's important on heroic because of the tight DPS check, and that's managing the spiritual innervation. So I talked about this a bit in the normal guide if you saw that. But if not, essentially spiritual innervation is a stacking buff gained when you receive heals while you're within the spirit realm. And especially if you're using 2 healers, you need to figure out ways to maximize this as much as possible, so that players that are exiting the spirit realm have as close to the 30-second maximum on their spiritual innervation as possible, and as high of a stack of the buff that they can get. And the stack count is based on the amount of healing per second received within the last X number of seconds. The actual value or the time that X stands for is unknown, but it's a non-linear curve. So going from 0% on your buff to 10% is only a couple heals, very simple. 10 to 20 is maybe 4 or 5 seconds of healing. But getting from 20 to 25, which is 25 being the maximum stack, requires a great deal of healing. So that exponential curve means that your investment in terms of time and healing spent on a given player needs to be balanced, considering that you only have 30 seconds in which to do it before you have to leave the realm. So generally you want to aim to have players exiting with near 30 seconds left on their buff, so meaning refreshing a heal on them in some way just before they leave, and at least 21 or 22% on the actual stack count. If you can do that every time, then that will maximize your DPS bonus from that buff for everyone in the raid. To that end, especially if you're using 2 healers, you want to try to always have a healer go in to every spirit totem phase if possible. Because if it's a non-healer that goes in, they will have to cover heals, and it's essentially losing their DPS that they would have offered anyway, while also not being able to heal quite as well on the players that are gaining the spiritual innervation buff. So the best pattern that we've found for healers that are going in there is to immediately heal yourself for a couple seconds just to get your spiritual innervation stacked to 20 or 30,000 mana. So you can see mine is a white number kind of below my character on the right. So I'm at 25,000 mana now. So that's a huge amount of regen. So just a couple seconds of healing, you'll get a few stacks, and then you can just spam any heal you want and still gain mana throughout the entire Spirit Realm phase. And that's the idea. So quickly heal yourself as a healer, and then heal your highest DPS dot player target second. So I mentioned that the Enhancement Shaman and Warlock are in my group. So after I heal myself, I tend to heal our Warlock second. So there I'm healing the Warlock. And heal him for 4 or 5 seconds. And then switch to the other DPS, do the same, 4 or 5 seconds. Then back to the first or highest dot DPS. And then back to the second DPS. So there's 5 total heal transition periods for your healer over 30 seconds. So split evenly at 6 seconds for each. But of course, you don't want to wait for the entire 30 seconds to leave. So realistically, it's closer to 5 seconds that you get for each player. And if you do this properly, so you healer, DPS 1, DPS 2, DPS 1, DPS 2, and then leave, If you do one more heal on everyone just before you leave, you'll get as close to that 30 seconds as possible, and everyone should have 21, 22% plus on their stack count. And that's just maximizing the DPS that you have when they are outside with Frail Soul. So highly recommend you practice that for your healers if you're having trouble with the stack count. And there are add-ons that I'll link in the description to help you deal with that, basically. So that covers all the new mechanics for Heroic pretty much. So as we go back through, this will just be the walkthrough of the video, sort of. And we'll talk about what it is we're doing here just to maximize all of our damage time. One downside to this fight is that because of the cross-realm mechanics, getting accurate readings for things like logs or damage meters, healing meters, is very difficult, since you can't see what's happening on one side of the spirit realm or the other. So you'll need to just figure out what it is players are doing based on their reports, rather than looking at, meters and all that stuff. So here you can see the first totem, and given our priority, we got our Warlock and our Enhancement Shaman going in there first with me. And we're waiting 10 seconds. I talked about this before. And then we all step in and burn it down quickly. And the raid is positioned in the center of the room just to minimize the travel time from our location to any given location of a totem, wherever it might be. So I'm healing myself first, then our Warlock, then our Shaman, then throwing a hot on myself so it'll bounce to everyone, since the tank tends to come in at this time. And then back to the Warlock, back to the Shaman, and then our time is about ending here. So do another quick refresh on heals, and then pop back out. So that's pretty much it there. And looks like 23% on the Warlock, 22% on the Shaman. So that's about ideal. And that's pretty much the pattern that seems to work best. And then once you come back out, immediately stack up behind the boss again. This is just to maximize your AE healing, which is important because the damage from voodoo dolls is extreme on Heroic. Some healers are better suited than others. As a monk, I found voodoo doll healing to be quite difficult, just because covering multiple targets with single target heals is not really our strong suit. So I actually found that the best thing was often just to spam Surging Mist with Soothing Mist active on one voodoo doll target, throw an enveloping mist on them when I get 3 chi, and then swap to the next voodoo doll target that's in most danger, and just keep doing that. Because often with 2 healers, you'll be the only one healing for most of the fight outside, so you need to have a lot of coverage. There can also be difficulty in transition periods. So when one healer is going into the spirit totem realm and one is just coming out, people that are voodooed at that time will often take a lot of spike damage that isn't really covered. So it's really important that your healer that runs over to the totem to go in, as soon as they get in position, they're spamming heals on the voodoo doll targets at that time, just to keep them topped off as much as possible, so that transition is eased a little bit more. And other than that, it's just kind of a matter of maximizing your DPS and your uptime on the boss while dealing with all the adds. So you'll see at times, like here, there aren't very many adds. So I think if I'm not mistaken, I'll actually tell one of our DPS to leave early. So yeah, I told our Shaman to leave early once I got his stack to a reasonable level, because there just weren't enough adds in here for him to have to stay in here and waste DPS time. So my Warlock buddy and I just stayed in there until the full duration, and he dotted things up, and I kept his stack high. So that's something you can do, but you'll have to just do it on the fly based on how many targets are available inside. Generally speaking, damage on adds is wasted damage, right? The longer the fight lasts, the more adds will spawn. And if you can just kill the boss faster, then the less damage overall you'll have to deal to the apparitions and whatnot. So if you can afford it, have people leave earlier rather than later in that spirit realm, as long as their stacks are reasonable, and get back on the boss. And the more time they can spend on him, the better. So we try to do that a little bit, but it doesn't often happen that we can do so. And so here we are back in the Shadow Realm one more time. Now at 20% is just like normal, the transition. So spirit totems will stop spawning, and tanks will stop being ported in, and Gara'jal will frenzy. So again, Voodoo Doll damage is way high. So here he's frenzied. We were the last group inside. And we've already used Bloodlust at the beginning of the fight because that's the longest duration in which no one has stepped in. So that's another reason we delay that first group about 10 seconds, is so that we can maximize our time with that 40-second Bloodlust active, actually DPSing the boss before we start going in and out. And here we're just trying to maximize survival, so blow all your cooldowns here, especially if you have Voodoo Doll on you. Survival cooldowns are important, and you'll probably be close to the Berserk, but anything you can do to extend the life will help a lot. So yeah, pretty challenging fight, but just get that gear and that DPS worked out, and you should get through it. Good luck, and thanks for watching.